Again, welcome to Java Programming 1. In this section, we're going to discuss about user-defined classes. Again, we discussed already about Java built-in class such as the math class, the string class, etc. And in this section, again, we're going to learn how to build our own classes. So this topic is user-defined classes. Our objective is to learn about classes, learn about private, protected, public, and also static members of a class, and also explore how classes are implemented. And that's our main objective of these lectures, how we can implement classes in Java programming language, and also learn about various operations on classes. So this is an example of a class. We know class consists of two things. They are data members, which again tell us the characteristics or the attributes of the class object. And also their methods. The methods tell us the behavior or the task of the class object. And we'll see an example soon, but let's say, for example, if we have a class named employee, the characteristics of employee can be the last name, the first name, address, pay rate, etc. Now, the behavior of an employee can be late to work. Employee can get salary, pay salary, so we have to calculate the salary of employee, etc. So in the class string, our data members or the variables will be strings, to store strings somewhere in a variable. Then the behavior will be we can compare two strings, or we can concate one string to another. Concate means to join. So join two strings together or compare two strings together. Or we can change the characters of a string to lowercase. So we have a method to lowercase. Again, these are the built-in method in a string class. We also have to uppercase or char out to check the character or position of the character of each string. So again, a class consists of two things. They are data members and also their methods. So when we are going to again define our own or create our own class, the first thing we should know is that we use the keyword class. So a class, everything is lowercase class. It's a reserved word. And also collection of fixed number of components. The components are the member of a class. And the member of a class can be either the variables or the methods. And also we say the class categories or modifiers can be private, protected, and public. So what is a private? A private means if we declare any members of the class as a private, it means it cannot be accessed outside the class. Only the members of that particular class can directly access it. So this is what we call encapsulation for security. So I may have a class members in the class and I don't want any outside class or program to access it. Most of the time we make our instant variables or the variables that we declare in the class level as private because we want our data to be secure. And most of the methods, we keep it as a public, unless the method is a service method, which means it delivers service to the only within the class that is defined. Then we can make it a private. So a public again means any class members in another class or within the program, any methods can have access to it. Protected is deal with what we call the inheritance. So if I have class A and B, and class A inherit class members from class B, I can make the instant variable protected, which means they can directly access each other. So we say a private is a member of a class are not accessible outside the class, as we said earlier. And public means the member of the class are accessible outside the class. So public members can be accessed by any class in the program. But private members can only be accessed within the class that is defined at. So class members can be either the methods or the variables. As we said, a class consists of two items: the characteristics of the class and the behavior of the class, which are the variables or data, and then the methods are the behavior. And variables members declare like any other variable. So this is a general syntax for defining a class. We have our modifiers. The modifiers can be either private, protected, and public. Then with the modifiers, the next we use the keyword class. Then the class identifiers will be the name of the class. Then we can also have modifiers. Then within the open and close parentheses, which is the body of the class, we have the class members. So here we are going to again declare the class variables and the methods. And if you write, we can implement it, the methods here. So we'll see an example soon. Now here we say if a member of a class is named constant, then we declare it just like any other name constant. And we use the keyword funner. Also, if a member of a class is a variable, then we declare it just like any other variable. So just the data type and the name of the variable. And if a member of a class is a method, you define it just like any other method. So we may either have the returning type, the name of the method, and its argument. If it's a static method, we have to have the keyword static. But again, methods that are defined in a class are not static method. Static method means a method that doesn't belong to a class. But we can also use the keyword like private or public. So if a member of a class is a method, it can directly access any member of the class. That's if we have a method in one class, that very class data members, the method can access it. So here we say, therefore, when you write the definition of a method of the class, you can directly access any data member of the class without passing it as a parameter. So let's look at example here. Let's say we have example, a class named clock. We know clock here, we have 3 data members because we know a clock may have hours, minutes, and seconds. Now it's up to us to use the modifiers here. We make sure our data is private, secured. So it can only be methods in class clock are the only method that can access it. Other method in other classes cannot access it. So the definition will be the keyword private, the data type, and the name. So we have hours, minutes, and seconds. Then we have the methods. Based on the behavior of the clock, we can have a method to set the time. So always we can set our time, which start with hours, minutes, and seconds. Also, we can decide to get only the hours, get minutes, or get seconds. This is called the accessors. The accessors method, get methods. Then we can also print our time. We can also increment our seconds, increment our minutes, increment our hours. We can also check if we have another clock, we can check if 2 clocks are equal. So we have the equal method, and we can see the returning type for equal is Boolean. So if the 2 clock time is equal, it will return true. If they are not equal, it will return false. Then we also have a method named make a copy. This will make a copy of a clock. So if I have 1 clock and we have the time already, I can create a new clock and I'll assign the time of the previous clock to it by calling make a copy to again, copy the time on it. Then we can also have a method named get copy to get a copy of the clock. So we can see the returning type is an object clock, because get copy will return a copy of the clock. So let's go through each method. We have what we call the constructors. Constructors, we discussed that when we were even discussing about the built-in Java classes, because constructor is a very important method in a class. A constructor normally initialize, or we say even create the object. And we have two types of constructors, the parameters and those without a parameters. Again, with parameters or those with no parameters. And the constructor main work is to initialize an object. So anytime we are creating a new object, we have to call a constructor to create it for us. A default constructor means there's no argument, so whatever default value is, it will create it for us. The one with parameter means we will set our initial value. For example, I can create a clock, and I'll say the time is 6 hours, 20 minutes, 30 seconds. If I want the exact time, then I have to call the constructor with parameters and set the time in the argument. Now, if I want the time to be default, let's say 000, then I'll call the default constructor. So the constructors also, they have a special properties. And one of the common properties is that the name of a constructor is the same name as the name of the class. So if I have employee class, my constructor name also be employee. Also, a constructor, even though it is a method, it doesn't have no type. It doesn't expect no returning type. We don't use no void, we just leave it blank. And also a class can have more than one constructor. So I may have 2 or more constructors based on the parameters. So I may have a constructor to set the parameters to default or set it to a specific value. And we will see an example. Actually, we call this the overriding. We are overriding the method, or in this case, the constructor. When you have 2 methods with the same name, but the arguments are different, it's overriding. So next also we said that if a class has more than one constructor, then any 2 constructors must have different signatures. Different signature means it must have a different argument. And this is what we call overriding again. So constructors are automatically executed when a class object is instantiated. So anytime we create a new class object using a new keyword, constructors are automatically executed. And if there are multiple constructors, which constructor execute depend on the type of value passed to the class object. So let's see our constructor. So we can see in the clock, our first constructor is default constructor. So we have clock, empty argument. So whatever the default time is, that's what to give us. Now constructor with parameter, we can set the hours and minutes and seconds as our argument, and we can set it to any time. So this is our class diagram for the clock. We have 3 variables. We also, actually, with the correct term to use this, instance variable. Instance variables are variables that are declared in the class level. So we can see this variable belongs to the class name clock. So it's instance variable. So we have hours, minutes, and seconds. A dash or minus means private. Plus means public. So here we make sure our millisecond data members are again private, and their type is integer. So we have the default constructor, which is called the clock and empty argument. Then we have constructor with parameters. Here it's taking 3 parameters, the hours, minutes, and seconds. We also have the method set time, which can change the time of the hours, minutes, and seconds. So it takes 3 arguments. And when it set the time, it doesn't return the time to the method. So the returning type is again void. We can see that in constructor, no returning type, also no void. There's no void. Now get hours, since hours is in minutes, hours is in integer, it will return the integer. We saw here hours, minutes, second, they are all data type int. So the same thing applies to get minutes and get seconds. Returning types will be int. So next is the print time. Increment seconds by 1, increment minutes, increment hours. We also have the equals method that we check if two clocks are equal, and also make copy, that will make a copy of a clock from an existing clock. Then get a copy of the clock. So again, this is a class clock. The attributes, again, as we said earlier, are only 3 because hours, minutes, and seconds. But think about any behavior. A constructor is always in any built-in class or user-defined class. The constructors are always called when we are creating a new object. But the behavior here will be hours, get minutes, get seconds, print the time, increment the seconds, minutes, and hours. Also check if two clocks are equal, or make a copy of a clock from an existing clock, or get a copy of a clock. So variable declaration and object instantiation, we already know how to declare variable. And as we said earlier, declaring a variable in the class level is the same as declaring a variable with a primitive type or any kind of. So the general syntax for using operator new is new the class name, or new class name and the argument. So here what I'm trying to do is to create an object, which we can also call variable. So the type is clock. So when I say clock, my clock, it means I'm just declaring the object, but I didn't create it. When I want to create it dynamically, I will use the new keyword. So clock my clock equal to new clock. This will create a new clock object. Or clock your clock equal to new clock. We set the time 9 hours, 35 minutes, 15 seconds. So this is a constructor. The first one here, the first one, clock with empty argument, is default constructor. And the second is the constructor with arguments. So variable declaration and object instantiation. When we declare our variable my clock, we use what? A default constructor. It's right here. My clock is a default. My clock is a default constructor. So here our default value is 000 for hours, minutes, a second. The second clock, which we call your clock, we use the constructor with the parameter. So let's go back. We can see we set the hours to 9, minutes to 35, seconds to 15. And that's what we have here. So this is what we get. Again, hours, minutes, seconds, everything 000 default. And your clock is clock with parameter, we set the values. Now the syntax to access the data member of a class object or method is always the object name. So here we say the reference variable name dot the member name. So for example, in an object also, we normally create the object in the main method. So I have a class name clock. We have all the necessary properties for the class clock, which is hours, minutes, seconds, and also their methods. Now I'll go to the main method and I'll create an object type, which is what we did here, clock, my clock. So this small, my clock is like a variable, but we use the term object, and the data type is clock, which is the class name. So we do this normally in the main method. Then here I can say my clock dot, I can set the time, or I have the method to print time in our clock class. And since my clock is a clock class type, I can use any method inside the clock class. So I decided to use the print time method in the clock class to print the content of my clock. I can also set the time for your clock. And since I have two clocks now, I can check if my clock is the same as your clock using the equals method again in the class clock. Next is assignment operator. Now, when we use this statement here, what I'm trying to do is I want to assign your clock to my clock. Now, my clock is 10:28:45. Your clock hours is 7:27 minutes, 36 seconds. But the goal is that I want to set your clock to my clock, which means I want to change my clock time to your clock. Now, when you use assignment operator, this is object-oriented concept. So you can see that when we declare primitive type, the value will stay in the memory that it is. But when we declare reference type, normally the variable there, the reference variable, will consist of the address of where your items are in the memory. So we can see my clock pointing to the location where we have our millisecond, your clock the same. Now, if I assign this, instead of changing the content 7:27:36 to in my clock, changing your clock time to my clock time, it won't do that. What it will do is that it will change the direction, the pointer of my clock to point to your clock, and it will look something like this. And normally we use the term alias. So my clock becomes alias. Alias is when we have two variables pointing to the same location. And we use the term shallow copying here. Shallow copying means two or more reference variables of the same type point to the same object. So here it's pointing to the same object. Now the next we are going to use a method copy to do what we call the deep copy. Deep copy means each reference variable refers to its own object. So our goal is that we want to see the 7:27 and 36 here, while my clock will point to the first object, not to point to your clock. And that's what we call the deep copy. So here we use the method make copy. So my clock dot make copy your clock. And we can see the two again are the same now. And they are pointing individually to their own location where the items are stored. So next, let's look at, we can write our set time method. So we say set time take 3 arguments, the hours, minutes, and seconds. So here, again, it depends on the person writing this program. Here, we want to make sure that hours is from 0 to 23. We go all the way from 0 to 23:59 or 23:59. When we get to the 60, instead of 24, we start from 0. So 24 is 0000. So because of that, we want to make sure that when we set time, we don't want to set time to 26 hours if it's 24 hours and 2 hours more. So we have a condition checking here that if the hours is less than 24 and also is greater than or equal to 0, then we don't need to do anything. We just assign the hours to HR. But when we reach over 24, we want to set the hour back to 0. So if the condition is false, HR equal to 0. So if this, again, the condition here means hours can go up to 23 and hours cannot go below 0. So from 0 to 23 hours. When we get to 24 hours, we start all over from 0 again. So we say if it's from 0 to 23, then we assign the hours to HR. Else, we assign 0 to HR, which means maybe we pass 23, 24. And minutes also is up to 60 minutes. So the same thing we are checking first. So before we set the time, we want to check if it's between 0 to 59. If it's the value is between 0 to 59, then set it. Otherwise, if it's more than 59, then set the minutes to 0. The same thing with seconds. Seconds should be from 0 to 59. Otherwise, again, set it to 0. So definition of constructors and methods of the class, we can see my clock, and also when we say my clock dot set time 3:48:52, we change the time from 12:36:49 to 3:48:52 using the method set time. So always if I want to use a method, I have to start with the object name. But this is again object oriented. And the method is not static. So anytime I'm using it, I have to refer to the method I'm using it on. So this is also the get hours. We call this the accessor. So get hours will return only HR. Get minutes will return the min or minutes. Get seconds will return the sec or seconds. And we can see that the returning type on the method front is int throughout. Because in the main class, hours, minutes, seconds are in int. Now to print the time is up to us. Here we want to print the time very nice. So if it's a single digit, we want to put 0 in the front. So it should be 0124 or something. So we said that if the hours is less than 10, which means it's a single digit, we want to start with 0 first. So we print 0, then we print the rest of the HR. And see here, we don't have no space between, no space. Now, if the minutes are less than 10, the same thing also, we want to start from 0 before we print the minutes. Seconds are less than 10, we want to start from 0. So it can be 10 hours, 08 seconds, 02 minutes. Or 10 hours, 40 seconds, 20 minutes. Now, to increment the hours, we want to increment by 1. So we use the increment operator. So HR plus plus. Now, if HR is greater than 23, we don't want to go to 24, so we assign 0 to HR. Increment minutes. Normally, we're going to increment the minutes using the increment operator here, n plus plus. Now, we check if the minutes is greater than 59. But if the minutes is greater than 59, we start from 0 again. But we have the time, the highest unit is hours, minutes, and seconds. So when we reduce it to 0, which means we reach 60, we are going to increment the hours. So we call the increment hours method to increment the hour. Because 60 minutes means 1 hour. So we increment the hours by 1. Here, like if we are dealing with, if the clock will be dealing with days, like we can say, okay, if the hour is greater than 23, then we're going to have a new day. So increment seconds to the same thing, sec increment operator, which is plus plus. But if the sec is greater than 59, set it to 0. 60 seconds is 1 minute, so we call the increment minutes method. So next, we want to check if 2 clocks are equal, so we can call the method equals. And how do we implement it? We just check if the hours is the same, if the minutes is the same as the other clock minutes. We also check if seconds is the same as the other clock seconds. If all these 3 values are true, then it will return true to the method equals. So here also we say the method of the class clock continue. We say if my clock dot equal to your clock, we are checking these 2 clocks as the same. So if this is equal to this, again, we return true. We can also do make copy. Make copy means you want to do copy of the clock to a new one. So you can see other clock dot R, which is our clock. We assign it to the new clock. Other clock dot mean, we assign it to the mean. Other clock dot second, we assign it to the second. So what we do is that we have a new clock and we are assigning all the value of the older clock to the new clock. So here, this is a definition to get a copy. First, we create our temporary to hold our value temporary. So the type also is clock. So we have clock temp equal to new clock. We assign the HR to temp.hours, mean temp.mean, sec temp.sec. Then later we return the temporary. So what we are doing here again, making a copy of the clock. And this is the definition again. Clock temp equal to new clock, hours, minutes, and second. So making a copy of hours, minutes, and second. Yeah. Here the default clock, as we said, we set everything to 0. Hours, minutes, and second. Or since set time also set hours, minutes to seconds, we can call the set time method inside the default constructor. So next is our constructor with parameters. So here we can see we set the hours, minutes, and seconds. Again, the code here is the same as set time. Since the constructor with parameters means we are going to set our time of the argument when we create our new, so it's the same concept. We also want to check if the value is between 0 to 23. Otherwise, we assign 0 to it if it's greater than, if it's 24 up. Same thing, the minutes, between 0 to 50, to 60 is okay. To less than 60, so 59 is okay. When you go to 60 up, then we assign 0 to the mean. The same thing with the seconds also. So here we want to see an example. So we have a class named inventory, and we have 4 data members: the name, item number, price, and unit in stock. Now we can see how we can implement different constructors. So our first constructor is default. So we set the name to nothing, empty string, item number -1, price is 0.0, unit in stock is 0. Now let's see the second. So second constructor, we're only changing the name. So item num, price, unit in stock is the same default value, but the name will be different. Then third constructor, we are changing the name, the item number, and also the cost. So user have to enter the 3 items. The unit in stock is constant. Then the fourth, we say, okay, we are changing everything. We change the name, the ID num, the cost, and also unit, cost, and then in stock, unit in stock. And we assign the values and item, num, cost, and then in stock. So here we can create a new object as item 1, default, item 2, only the dryer, item 3, we can have the name, the washer, 2, 3, 4, 5, and also the price. So the second one, we have the the item number. So 2, 3, 4, 5 is the item number, then the price. Then the fourth one, we have to change or set all the 4 items. So the name, the item number, the price, the number of item in the stock. So a copy constructor always execute when an object is instantiated. And also it will initializing using an existing object. That's why it's called copy constructor. So the syntax will be public class name, then a class name, other object. Next, we have the copy constructor continue here. We say the definition of the copy constructor for the class clock is what we are doing. We are just making a copy. So we have other clock, which is the object, other clock dot hour go to the hours, the minutes go to minutes, the seconds go to seconds. Now we saw the accessors and also mutators. Accessors is the get methods. Mutators are the set method. You can see that in a clock, instead of setting the hours, minutes, and seconds separately, we know as a clock, when we are calling the time, the hours, minutes, and seconds, we don't do it separate. They are all together as one unit. So our mutator was only one, set time. But again, we may write another program. For example, if I have a program for, let's say we have employee class and I have employee object, and employee have attribute as first name, address, salary level, etc. I can set last name, set first name, set the address, or set number of hours work, and also set hourly rate. So set method is called a mutator to change the value. Then accessor is to get. So here we have our class clock, our 3 variables, hour, minutes, and seconds. We have our default constructor, initialize everything to 0. And we have constructor with, again, parameter. Normally we call this the ADT, abstract data type concept. So we have the set time also, then get hours, we can get minutes, we can get seconds, etc. Then we write the rest of the method. So in summary, in these lectures, we learn the basic concept of classes, object-oriented programming, what class consists of, how to implement the class. And normally a class consists of 2 things. They are data members and also they are methods, and how to implement both. In our next lectures, we're going to have a lab work on it and maybe go through some code. Again, wish everybody the best. Thank you. Bye. Also, I'm going to post these lectures in my YouTube channel, so you can have a comment or like or subscribe. And subscribe is better because, again, if I posted any new video in any computer science or mathematics course, you will be notified.